Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Tribal Voices Matter speaker series, The Rights of Nature, the Rights of the Snake. My name is Rachel Wilson, and I am the Communications Manager for the Nez Perce Tribe. So I will be your host as part of the Nez Perce Tribe and the Salmon Orca Project. But before we proceed, let us take a moment to honor and acknowledge the ancestral lands on which we all stand. We recognize and pay respect to the indigenous peoples and tribal nations who have been stewards of these lands for generations. The Salmon Orca Project firmly believes that in the power of collaboration and unity, through this webinar series, we aim to foster a platform where tribal leaders, community members, experts, and stakeholders from various backgrounds can come together, share experiences, and work toward innovative and equitable solutions. And so with that, I would like to, I'll introduce our speakers and give them some time and space if they would like to add anything else. But today we have the pleasure of having Elizabeth Dunne and Julian Matthews. So I'll first start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Dunne, she brings 20 years of legal experience and a passion for designing legal frameworks that enable systematic change. So drawing on her experience as a lead counsel in public interest, class action lawsuits, and as a law clerk, the Honorable Helen Gillmor, which is the U.S. Federal District of Hawai'i. Elizabeth is a leading practitioner in the development of litigation strategies that advance EarthLaw. And she is also the Director of Legal Advocacy at the EarthLaw Center and also supports work in DamSense. So Elizabeth, I'll actually hand it to you if you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about what you do.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the introduction and really happy to be here and excited about this conversation. So my background, I've been involved in litigation and drafting different laws and policies for over 20 years. I first became involved in sort of what's known as the Rights of Nature movement or EarthLaw around 2010 and was involved in some of the early laws to really raise consciousness about what it could look like to recognize the rights of nature and our responsibilities to nature, like the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, a lawsuit on behalf of the Colorado River, and some of those initiatives. And so what I do in my practice and with the EarthLaw Center is to work with communities, tribes, really anyone who is interested in advancing this work to create this systemic change in our laws and policies, to recognize that it's not just humans that have rights, but nature that has rights and different species that also have rights. And then in my work with for years, was involved with DamSense, which is a nonprofit that was founded by the late Jim Waddell, who really put together a comprehensive strategy on how we could get to breaching the lower Snake River dams, how to do so in terms of the cost of doing so, and then just a practical pathway to achieve that. And I'm excited for this conversation because I've always felt like recognizing the rights of the Snake River and the southern resident orcas and other species that depend upon these ecosystems is an important part of the conversation.
Awesome, thank you for that. Okay, and then we'll get into the questions after the rest of the introduction. So the next person on our panel today is Julian Matthews. He is an enrolled member of the Nez Perce Tribe. He is a U.S. Navy veteran and has been actively involved in environmental issues for the last 20 years, primarily in response to threats made on or near the Treaty of 1855 and usual and accustomed areas. So that's a pretty broad area, Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. So these areas are guaranteed to the Nimipu with the signing of the 1855 treaty. And in many instances, the federal, state, or local governments or private interests interpret these rights quite differently than the Nimipu people do. And so with that, Julian, I will hand it over to you to maybe tell a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, Katia, yeah, that pretty much lays it out. Also, when I got out of the Navy, I went to Gonzaga, got an undergrad degree there, and got a master's from U of I while working at the tribe. I worked for the tribe between Coeur d'Alene and Nez Perce for 30 years. I'm semi-retired now, so that's nice. And work for a part-time Sierra Club and Nimi Poo protecting the environment. And yeah, we just started getting involved in rights of nature. Actually, Elizabeth and Grant Wilson from EarthLaw, they really helpful. And I was just thinking about how I first met Grant. I think he emailed me and started talking to me about the whole idea of rights of nature, rights of river, rights of Mother Earth. And at first it seemed kind of hard to understand or seemed like a really new idea. But then once I talked to him more, then I started looking at how Indians or tribal members or the tribes interpret the rights of nature. Then I started realizing this really goes along with how we really believe the relationship between the people, the land, the spirituality, the creator. And so this rights of nature or rivers that we have now, and then the rights of Mother Earth are really go right along with what we believe. To me, well, personally, what I believe in the connection we have with the nature and the spirituality, the concept that these rivers and the land and the trees all have importance, and not just because they're able to be commodified and exploited. So, thanks.
Thank you for the introductions, Elizabeth and Julian. It's a pleasure to have you both here with us today. You guys have a very very wide knowledge in your expertise. So definitely appreciate you taking the time out today to join us. So with that, I will go ahead and start with the first question, either for Elizabeth or Julian. So what does recognizing the inherent rights of the Snake River, Columbia Basin salmon, and southern resident orcas entail, and how does it differ from current environmental protection laws that we have? So it's a long question, so I'll just say it one more time. So what does recognizing the inherent rights of the Snake River, Columbia Basin River salmon and southern resident orcas entail? And then how does that differ from current environmental protection laws?
Julian, did you want to go first, or do you want me to?
No, you can go, then I'll go.
Okay.
Elizabeth.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess first I just kind of briefly describe for those who aren't familiar with sort of how our current environmental laws work. And this is not to be critical of those laws, because there's been a lot that has been achieved with them. And I'll just mention two: the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. I mentioned those because those have been involved in and have been used to try to improve the health of the Snake River, to try to prevent the extinction of Snake River salmon. And, a lot of good has been achieved with those laws, but there's limitations to them. And we see that in the fact that the litigation that's been going on before 2001, but, for decades, essentially, right, has resulted in a lot of wins that have gone back to study, what are the impacts, and create this record of looking at, what should be done to protect these endangered species that are impacted by the Snake River dams. But it's been very difficult to get to the place where we're actually getting the comprehensive remedy and restoration of the river ecosystem that we need. And so those are some of the limitations we have in the current environmental protection laws. They really allow, there's a process there to apply for permits, like under the Clean Water Act, that allows a certain amount of pollution. So the orientation is around permitting a certain amount of harm, rather than an orientation around looking at what does the health of the river need? What does this ecosystem need? What if we consider this river as a relative, that we have a relationship with the river, that this river gives us life and we need to care for the river? What would that look like if the river had the right to exist, thrive, and evolve? And equally, if not more important, that we had responsibilities to fulfill towards the river, towards those species, that we cannot just sit and let these species go extinct. And so recognizing the inherent rights of the river, of the species, is to say that it's not just humans that have rights. It is a relationship between humans and the natural world. And in the Western legal system, we assign really value. We use the phrase rights when we're assigning value. And so what it can do to recognize the rights of the Snake River and the southern resident orcas is to put them on a different playing field, to put their voice in the courtroom, to put their voice in different forums, and to have them as really a key and actually central stakeholder in the conversation of what do we need to do to address what is this extinction and climate crisis with what's occurring in with the Snake River and the southern resident orcas and salmon. So I'll stop there to pass it over to Julian, although I think I just might have jumped away for a second. I can keep talking until he comes back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, we can move on to the next question.
You can move on to the next question, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just move on to the next question. Oh, Julian. Glad you're back.
There's someone at my door, so.
Oh, no, you're fine. So do you want to answer this question? What does
Sure.
recognizing the inherent rights of the Snake River, Columbia River Basin, and southern resident orcas entail? And then how does that differ from current environmental protection laws?
Well, I think mainly right now, like Elizabeth really explained it out well. The recognizing the inherent rights of the river, the water, these are sacred elements. Water sacred. Everyone needs water. Same with the salmon and the orcas. When we started this issue, we started looking at the orcas. Their primary food source is salmon, Chinook salmon, and those are the ones that come up here and spawn in our territory and are supposed to go back. I don't know about the hatcheries and stuff, but it's important for us to realize that the salmon, the water, land is sacred, and that we don't simply want to use it to exploit it. Or like I said before, it was looking at ways how we can use it. And I think with like you said, the ESA and Clean Water Act, those are really political. They can get really political. Like right now, when a species is delisted, the state takes it over, and we see how it works in Idaho with the wolves. They want to get rid of all of them. So the ESA and those others are Clean Water Act are really they're great, but then they don't really, to me, provide enough input from, like, say, the tribes. And I think the tribes need to take more direct involvement in these Clean Water Act and but essentially with the rights of nature, rights of the land, rights of the water, it's important for us to view those as sacred entities made by the creator. The natural world we're a part of it. We don't own it, or not the lords of the land or the animals, and we're part of it. So we need to play a less exploitive role in that. So, but I think the laws are good, but they're also subject to a lot of political whims, and you see how that goes right now in today's society. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, how can the rights of nature be integrated into existing legal frameworks? And what challenges might we face in doing so?
You want me to take turns going first?
Yes, no, Julie.
Okay, one of the things, like actually what we came up with was the rights of the rivers. And so my angle is the tribe. There's a lot of federal issues going on, federal government. And so what I'm trying to push for our tribe to look more into this and develop, like we put in the rights of rivers resolution. The tribe passed it. I have the articles when the trib published it. And so what I'm trying to get it to where our tribe, we have the resolution with the snake rights of the river, but we also need to codify it into our tribal law and order code. So it's actually a right, like say, we have civil rights, under the Constitution. And so we need to work on getting that, to me, with our tribe, to get it codified into our tribal law and order code. So these rights are able to be adjudicated in court. Right now, they're not, but we have the resolution. So, and the rights of nature is the same thing, as we don't have specific rights for anything other maybe than human beings. And so I think it's important that we, that's what I'm working on, get it into our tribal law and order code so they have rights and they're available. We can take them to court, like in an entity or state, federal. But that's also a really big issue about where does the state's rights and the tribe's rights begin? Because as you see on our reservation, that we own about 15 to 20% of the land. And so that really goes into play about, and even with the rights of nature and the river is how do we get that to where we have more control on what goes on in the water, with the dams and the salmon and that type of thing. So those are the big issues, are the legal framework, actually getting it into the law and order code or even the state code. Idaho's really against it. They've already come out against it a couple of years ago. And so I think it's important to work. But my thing is working with the tribes and locals in our area.
Thanks, Julian. I can add a couple things. And yeah, I think that as Julian said, right, a part of the work and the work that Julian and others did is getting this resolution passed, recognizing the rights of the Snake River, and then getting that to a place where it's codified so it becomes an enforceable law would be a next step in terms of what could be done, at the tribal level. But also, I mean, I think that this working together with, as Julian mentioned, the state of Idaho actually banned legal personhood for nature. There hasn't been a legal challenge to that law yet. In Washington state, though, I think we still have a lot of opportunity to advance something at the state level that would actually be complementary to the efforts, to tribal efforts, really revitalizing Indigenous legal orders. Some work that I do with a First Nation in British Columbia, that's a lot of what this is about, is actually writing down, revitalizing the values that are held in the Indigenous legal orders, and then also incorporating with that this rights language and framework, so that then when it interfaces with the Western legal system, you now have this conversation where the Snake River, for instance, has rights and can be recognized, and you can't just ignore really what the Snake River needs and what the species within the Snake River that are endangered need to exist and thrive. And so it changes the level, it changes the conversation by this recognition in the legal system. As Julian flagged, there's a lot of pieces still in play being worked out in terms of jurisdictional issues. How far, if a law is passed in a certain place, where does that jurisdiction extend to? But I think that's where there's a lot to be said in terms of cooperative agreements. And here you also have the federal government, I guess here, and thinking specifically because of my work regarding the Snake River and the Snake River dams, I think about strategies around a cooperative agreement, which would involve government to government relations between the tribe and the federal government, and then also the state of Washington, where the 4 lower Snake River dams are located. And so, there's examples where there's a myriad of examples around the world, because this movement has really taken off worldwide of a variety of ways of how to implement in the legal system. In New Zealand, it was through a settlement agreement, essentially, where it established this co-guardianship body. Sometimes it can be through court decisions, which is not really something that occurs in our legal system. It can be through this parallel recognition, as I mentioned, in a codifying in a constitution, a tribal constitution, or other law, and then also recognition at the state level to complement that effort. So I guess I wanted to flag one other important piece of these rights of nature frameworks is the precautionary principle. The recognition that we don't have to prove an absolute harm in order to be proactive and take action, right? And that's one of the challenges we have with the existing laws, is that often my experience in litigating is that you get to this place where it's this battle of the experts. And so one side is saying, oh, everything is fine, it's actually not killing as many fish as you think. And the other side is like, well, there's clear evidence that, this needs to happen. The dams need to be removed if we're going to save the salmon and the orcas. And so you can err on the side of looking at what does the ecosystem need to be restored, rather than having to jump over this very challenging hurdle to just like prove that there's this absolute harm. The burden should be on the other side, so to speak, to do that. We should really be presuming that we want to take care of these ecosystems and restore them, and that will then in turn be better for everyone.
That is great. That is a very great answer. And you actually helped lead me into the next question, in talking about the rights of nature and just all of these issues that kind of come along with this. So how can local communities or Indigenous groups and their allies be involved in the process of recognizing and enforcing these rights of nature. And Elizabeth, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the, again, we see a lot of around the world drawing from those experiences. We see where Ecuador, for instance, has rights of nature embedded in its constitution. So it's coming from sort of this top-down level and being interpreted by the court. And here in the US, I really see that we are, grassroots, local communities, working with the people who are connected with that ecosystem, relate to it on a daily basis, is a place where we're going to be building that momentum, because we also have this, embedded in not just the legal system, because the legal system is reflecting what's sort of embedded in this consciousness of a sense of like limitless resource extraction, all the things that came along with settler colonialism, that really just this mindset of destruction and domination of nature, and trying to break that down. Like, really a key part of this movement is to build a different consciousness around that, and then still that sense of responsibility. And so there's a lot to be learned, I think, as folks come, looking at the question, we look at local communities, Indigenous groups, and allies. I think there's so much learning to be done, really, from Indigenous elders, Indigenous groups, to really shift that consciousness and start to really put that into mainstream society, and go from a place where in 2010, when I was first involved in this movement and talking to lawmakers, and people just thought it was almost just an unthinkable thing that you could be, you'd be talking about these laws and enacting them, right? And we see that that is now shifted, and a lot of tribes are leading that effort now, to make that shift. And so it's really key that everyone works together and collaborates, and we hold what is needed for nature, really at the forefront of our consciousness in that.
Great, I'll move on to Julian's response.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the input. So the big thing with local communities, indigenous groups, and their allies is to get involved, learn more about it, rights of nature, rights of earth. And I think with that's one thing when I first started hearing about it or reading about it, was really kind of like I said, it's a new idea, not really new to tribes, but I think the tribes need to get involved. Yeah, we're involved with, like say here locally, with our OLC at the tribe, the council. I presented a rights of nature resolution to them, and they haven't really responded to it yet. But I think the main thing is learning about the whole issue, what it means, like how do you define that, and then how can we work within those confines of the rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth, rights of rivers that we have right now in our with our tribe. How do we incorporate those into how we think and how we believe? And that's the main thing, is because there's a point where you go from a kind of philosophical, spiritual thought to laws, and the laws are set. Even our tribal honor code is based on, or our tribal court is based on English common law, but is that really the way we want to do it? Maybe we want to have our own traditional law where we respect the rights of nature, the rights of rivers, the rights of animals to exist, or nature to live and flourish, just like we do it. I equate it with myself. I want to have a place to live, have a job, have food to eat. And so the same with the salmon, Chinook salmon, the grizzlies, whatever, eels, lampreys, they deserve that right. And they not deserve it, but they have that right. And so we need to work on protecting that. And I think mainly it's just getting people, like I said, I'm primarily tribal members, local communities involved in it. And what I thought about before last year was having a summit with tribes on rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth, to where we can get people together, because it is a new idea, like across Indian country even. So I think local communities need to be supportive of the idea. And even if it's not necessarily rights of nature, what we're trying to do, protect the river, protect the salmon, protect the creatures that live, the species that live in the wild, from further and like I said, it goes back to this idea that we own it. It's a commodity. If we need it, we'll keep it. If we don't, we'll get rid of it. Or if it gets in the way of what we're trying to do, who cares? We'll just get rid of it. No one needs it. And so that mentality needs to shift within our tribe, to where they start thinking outside the reservation box, as I call it, and look at how is what we're doing here impacting the water, the Columbia, the ocean, and how we treat those salmon also up here in our area, how they're being treated, to look at how we can look at the best way to be in harmony with nature, rather than trying to always restore it because it's been decimated. Thanks.
Thank you. And Julian, this next question will be your turn as well. So what has been the impact of recent proclamations by various municipalities supporting the recognition of the orca's rights? So we talk a lot about salmon, but now we're kind of getting into the orca.
Yeah, that's right. When we've had a couple of flotillas with the orca House of Tears carvers have come over here, and so I think the proclamation mostly on the west side. I don't think our tribe has one. Nez Perce tribe has an orca declaration. I can't say for sure. Maybe they do, but I think it's important because that ties in with the salmon. Because anything that is impacted by the and I know on the west side, I believe even the tribe had this rights, or the city of Seattle had a rights of salmon. But I think it's important because so go the orca, so go the salmon. That's my theory, my philosophy. And so I think it's important. These types of actions are important, and we need to continue and to expand on other cities, other counties that are willing to develop these types of rights. It's critical that we continue to do that, and we, like I said, get the education and information out, what it means, how can we do this, and what do we need to do individually to make sure that we push this rights of nature, rights of rivers, and essentially the rights of orcas to live. They have the right to live just like you and I do. And so I think it's important that we continue with this vein of ways to recognize the rights, particularly of the orcas. I know a lot of Lummi, they've been working to protect them. And so it's important that we continue that work.
Yeah, and I can just add a couple thoughts. I mean, my kind of interest and involvement in that, recognizing the rights of the southern resident orcas, goes back to the Governor Inslee's Orca Task Force, which held numerous meetings, as a lot of folks probably know, across the region, to really try to address this problem. What do we do with this extinction crisis with the southern resident orcas? And there was a lot of progress made in terms of the recommendations that came out of those meetings. But one thing that I really felt from participating in those was that there wasn't a clear voice for the southern resident orcas always at the table there. And a lot of people gave comments really working to be that voice. And so I actually started thinking on this idea of the southern resident orcas, just like Julian said, their right to exist, thrive, and evolve, their right to food from their naturally occurring food sources, which includes the Snake River. And so that interconnectivity of what do we need to do to really actually save these species from extinction? And there's a lot of urgency to take that action, and breaching the Snake River dams has really been identified as one of the key ways to get the salmon, the fastest way to get enough salmon to the southern resident orcas to prevent their starvation. If you look at the historical numbers of salmon that were produced from this region. And so I think it's been exciting to be involved in those proclamations and helping to support that local communities. I think the effect is it makes people say, just kind of going back to what I was saying, where it felt like it was almost impossible to be saying these concepts, and people, saying, yeah, that makes so much sense. And now we have dozen municipalities or so passing these recognition of the rights of the southern resident orcas. And I think that there's like Julian's saying, the Lummi Nation's done a lot, and so have others, really trying to elevate the cause and be the voice of the orcas. And so I think there's a lot of parallel efforts that can exist, and then really hopefully lead to state level legislation that would make a shift and would recognize these rights, and in doing so would also make a practical difference in terms of enforceable rights that would get us restoration of ecosystems to prevent their extinction.
Okay, and so if I could just have you both, so Elizabeth, I'll go back to you, but so in hearing your responses, and we talked about community and allies, Indigenous folks. So how can we effectively communicate this to policymakers?
That's a good question. Wait, is it my turn to go first or Julian?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess policymakers and the public.
Policymakers in the public. Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's always, it's always a great question. And I think one of the pieces that I've, kind of has come to me over the years of communicating this, and it's actually been from getting to the point where it's, gained enough traction that we're now getting pushback, right? We're now getting state level bans. We're now getting commentators saying like, oh, that's ridiculous, and making up these kind of sort of, suggestions of like, oh, a salmon has more rights than I do, like that kind of thing. And so I think one key piece in the communication is recognizing that this is about restoring ecosystems. This is about recognizing that we are part of nature, that what is good for nature is good for us. It's not a competition mindset. And I think that, again, sort of infiltrated almost like a disease throughout Western culture has been this like competition, this individualistic mindset of like, I want more, and then, this greed really mentality. And so I think people understanding that it's about restoring a balance, and it's about having a sense of responsibility and really knowing and believing that if you are taking care of an ecosystem and you are doing your part, then that is coming back to you. And sometimes it's hard to see that connection. So I feel like in messaging, really trying to explain that piece and people seeing that they are part of nature, I think has really helped. And it's not something to be, this concept isn't something to be afraid of. It's not taking away something from you. It's actually adding so much. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, so that like, thanks, Elizabeth. That's really good. That's really the big issue of like, how do you determine what people believe in? And I think that's where the rights of nature education comes across about what does that mean, and I know a lot of times maybe there's a lot of articles on it, there's a lot of scientific studies on it, or a lot of PhDs writing on it. But the main thing is, how do you get that to the level that people understand it? It's like, say, when I did the rights of nature, I presented a resolution. It was 10 pages long. I knew NEPTIC wasn't going to read it, so I shortened it down to 1 page. And so I think you have to get it to where, albeit the intrinsic value is, like I said, we're a part of this. We don't own it. We're not the lords of it, and we have to respect it and take care of Mother Earth and the water and the land and the forests and the animals, and not view them as some type of entities that can be used, albeit it's just like with the tribe, we use salmon for subsistence. I'm not interested in taking salmon from the river to commercially sell them or get a deer or elk to sell it. It's just for a traditional practice within our treaty that we have, and I want to continue that. And that's ties in with the rights, is the water and the nature has the right to continue to live as they were. And we can't continue to do what we've been doing in all aspects, whether it's timber cuts, damming rivers, whatever. And we have to look at alternatives to the current practices, alternatives to dams, alternatives to agricultural production, how we do that, what type of fertilizer we use, things like that, to where, because these all affect the water. I live in the Palouse, there's a lot of fertilizer going down there because it's all dry land farming. It goes into the reservoir, and who knows what it does to the fish, but things like that, which eventually go back to the orcas, and they eat this. There's not that many nowadays, but so I think we need to looking at as a being, I guess, the water or the fish and animals as beings that have the right to live just like we do. Don't separate, make a distinction between, we were talking about this yesterday, like the water and land is property. I own this property, just like they used to say with slaves and other people were considered property. And we don't want to think like that. We want to think of it as we're fairly in harmony with them. We're equal to it, and not just the masters of what happens to the salmon or the water or the orcas, because right now and they're decimating the numbers, and it's really sad to see. That's why I'm doing this, because we're trying to figure out ways that we can protect these salmon and the orcas in the water. And this is a really good way to look at it, and we have to continue pushing it this way or other ways to make sure that we can do what needs to be done to protect our treaty rights, essentially. And the other tribes' rights to hunt, fish, and gather. Thanks.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, so we're just going to have a couple more questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions from our audience. So what are the potential policy implications of recognizing the inherent rights of the Columbia Basin salmon, the southern resident orcas, and their ecosystems? So what are the potential policy implications? Julian, we'll go back to you.
Julian's
We'll go back to
chiming
you,
in
Julian.
first, but-
Okay, so I think the implication of recognizing the inherent rights of Golden Bay salmon as other reservoir is good. The implication would be really great because if they do have these rights and are outlined in a tribal law and order code or a municipal code, that will help protect them, and then we'll have a way to remedy any situations like, say, salmon and orcas living in the ocean or the river. Then if something happens to them, something detrimental is being done to them, dams, fertilizer being poured on them in the reservoirs, etc., or whatever, or the water being depleted through irrigation, then we have a way to rectify that through the tribal courts, because that's, like I said, the tribes use English common law. Everyone uses English common law. Do we really need to do that? But that's what we got now. So we need to have a way, and would be good, because that way they would have rights to be adjudicated. And the way we do it now is court, the legal system. And so it'd be nice if we didn't have to use the legal system, but that's the way it is right now. And so it'd be good for the Columbia River salmon and orcas to have rights that are able to be adjudicated in some court or legal procedure.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, I echo that. And I mean, I think the policy implications is that we would see that, there more needs to be done. And we would see that there would be new policies in place. We would have the voice of these ecosystems at the table in conversations. I can even, when I think about it, again, kind of relating it to the Snake River dams, because that's a lot of my orientation of work around the Snake River and with the southern resident orcas. You think about a situation where the law or the policy would, recognize that this is what this ecosystem needs. Like these dams need to be breached. As Julian said, there's other impacts too that need to be adjusted. And then there would be an ability to achieve that remedy. And at the same time, there would be an opportunity for this economic justice to occur, for rectifying, environmental justice concerns of rural communities, that within that type of law, which has been done in other countries, like compensation can be provided for impacts impacts to other stakeholders. But it would be a big shift to have a stakeholder at the table, really a central stakeholder being the ecosystem, being the river, being the salmon and the southern resident orcas, and looking at, these species are going extinct, and if we don't do something, kind of like a lot of the 1970s environmental laws that we have today were passed when things got pretty dire, right? There's like Lake Erie is on fire, all these things were happening, the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act comes into effect. I'd like us not to always have to get to that point before we make this big systemic change to just really recognize, like as Julian said, these concepts themselves are not new. They've been trampled by, again, a sense of like greed and over extraction and exploitation, but, really resurrecting those and shifting in the space of recognizing rights, and then maybe even shifting then to like an entirely different system is what we can envision in the future, where we're not even in this competition state at all. But anyway, I really feel like it's where we need to go if we're going to address this ecological, climate crisis and biodiversity crisis.
Thank you for that.
Oh, I just, if I could, Elizabeth reminded me of something, and really what it comes down to is also the economy and what we use. Like right now, there's a lot of, we use electric, we use fossil fuel. Everyone uses electric and fossil fuel, so we have to look at those issues, particularly with the dams. And with solar power, we use batteries, lithium batteries. There's a Shoshone Paiute, they're digging lithium on Shoshone Paiute land, sacred land. And so those whole issues we need to look at when you develop a policy is how we're going to address alternative energy, alternative forms of transportation, things like that, because it's not just, okay, they have rights now, but then how do we continue to protect that water and the orcas and salmon from further desecration? So it's not just switch one for the other, get rid of dams, use lithium, things like that, cobalt in Idaho, trying to drill for coal or get mine for cobalt and things. So we don't just want to have it. So the policy would be some way to guarantee, like say if it's a state or a tribal policy, that this is what we're going to do, do no harm, do less harm for any type of alternative energy that we use, things like that, to where it's more of an intellectual thought, not just say, okay, well, the biggest industry right now is fossil fuel. It is. We all drive vehicles, we all use gas or diesel. And so how do we use plastic? Plastics are produced by oil or petroleum products. So how do we reduce the cell phones, iPhones, PCs? And I know it's a big task, but that's what we have to look at, is how the whole impact of what we're doing impact. They say in some of those islands there's so much plastic in the water, and that's all petroleum product. And so that affects the fish and the whales and the oceans and the fish too, what goes into the river. Besides what we've talked about, the plastics are in the ocean, on the beaches, in the sand. And so it's really a holistic approach of how we're going to deal with this, but I just wanted to mention that about plastics.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, so we'll move on to our last question, and then we'll start answering some of the questions from the chat. So what long-term strategies should be implemented to ensure the sustainability and health of the ecosystems that support the southern resident orcas?
Is it my turn to go first? I can't
Yeah.
remember. Okay. I'm just helping my son with his socks.
I love the helmet.
Yeah, do some bike riding. So yeah, that is a great question. And I think, in terms of what the southern resident orcas need, there were a lot of great recommendations that came out of the governor's orca task force. I think that, and looking at the question too, focusing on the health of the ecosystems that support the southern resident orcas, I think, you can look at the, you look at the southern resident orcas, and I guess for folks that don't know, they eat salmon, primarily Chinook salmon. And so the health of rivers and river ecosystems is really key to their survival. And so you can actually look at sort of the rank of rivers where they've been able to track, like most of the salmon come from, that support the diet of the southern resident orcas. And the Snake River is one of those priority rivers. The Fraser River is a priority river. We hope that with I forgot to mention, I live in Port Angeles, Washington, and lower Elwha Clown territory. And so with the Elwha River, the undamming and the restoration of that river, there's a lot of hope that the comeback of the salmon will then also feed the southern resident orcas. And so taking care of these ecosystems, really looking at not just like what can they tolerate in terms of resource extraction, but what do they need to really thrive? And so that includes the health of the forests around the rivers, which is another passion and area of advocacy of mine. The forests feed the salmon feed the forest, right? That relationship and understanding those relationships. So looking at it, looking at it from that lens. And I do think, I think a lot of folks would agree, including NOAA, that, breaching the Snake River dams is a key, really needs to happen, right? And so the question is, how soon, when can that happen? And I really feel like if we elevate the voices of these ecosystems and the species, and we look at, the crisis that they're facing, and we look at the fact that we have remedies that we can put in place, dollars can address some of the other, impacts and harms of making that big shift. And it can feel scary, and there's fear around a big change. But I think just like with the Elwha River, once that happens and people see the rebirth and the restoration and what that can bring, then, there's no longer there's that sense of looking ahead and what can happen. And so, yeah, those are the things that I think are really important, really thinking holistically about their health and well-being.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I'd like to mention, of course, that about it's a tribe's big solar project, which is really great because those types of issues need to be addressed, about how we're going to restore the power, the electric power. And I think the tribe, that's really a really good strategy that I think Shannon Wheeler started working on. And so I think that's a really good thing. And that, like Elizabeth is saying, that we need to look at ways of how we can change what we're doing right now. And but also there's going to be implications from that. Say we get rid of the 4 lower Snake River dams, how that's going to, that's going to affect certain things. And then if we can, like I said, that's why we always work with the tie between the Chinook up here and the southern resident orcas, because there's a definite tie. It's just like everything's related. It's kind of like that. I tell people, like John Donne said, no man is an island. It's like no species could be eliminated without impacting other species, because it's you can't do that, and we don't want to do that. And so I think with the alternative energy, dam breaching is a big thing, and other practices that that are harmful to the water, that affect the fish. Like she's saying, I went to go dig in some medicine up at Carscowan Road, and they're doing a big clear cut, and that kind of irked me, because what happens is a clear cut, all that soil drains down into the creeks, drains down into the rivers, and goes and messes up the spawning areas in a lot of areas. And so forest practices are another big issue. They're doing that forest plan right now with the Clearwater and Esper, so those need to be commented on. We don't want that. We don't want snowmobiles going in there in the winter, and ATVs and all these sidecars that they're inventing now to go out, and so these types of strategies that we need to look at how we interact is the main thing with the forests, with the water and the land, and look at ways that we can make changes that are going to be healthy for these ecosystems and not destructive, because it's like I said, it goes back to this commodity. I want to clear cut timber or sell the wood. I don't care what happens to the land or the creek or the water system. So we got to look at what we're doing, and that starts on an individual basis, not just like yell at the government or Governor Inslee or the Corps of Engineers. What can we do to push for changes amongst our people or amongst our co-workers or whatever? How do we get that message out to the public? Like you're saying, that question is, we need to do that, get this issue out to the public. A lot of people may know about the relationship between Chinook and the orcas, so we like, hey, this is what's happening. That's why we're involved in this, and things like that. So we have a broad, the more people you get involved and understand it, a lot of people probably don't really know that much about the river or the salmon or the orcas. And so I think it's important to keep educating people around these issues. And that's a big strategy too, to get more people involved and say, hey, look at this, this happens, this is what's happening to the orcas because they don't have enough Chinook salmon. Oh, where do they come from? Oh, they come from here, the Nez country, in the Selway Lochsaw salmon. And so then you can tie that into the whole relationship between the two, the ocean and up here. So I think it's important to educate people on those kind of similarities or relationships, so thanks.
Thank you for that. Okay, so now I'm going to shift over to, we only have time for 1 or 2 more questions that I'll pull from the Q&A. So one question, since we brought up, Julian, since you brought up, the question is like, okay, well, we know what the issue is, we know how to address it, now how are we going to get this out to the public? So one of the participants had asked, what are current movements or policies taking place to give river salmon orcas rights, and how can they support it as an individual, and how it's kind of a long question, so feel free to answer the best of your ability. And then is there a way that the individuals can put pressure on Senator Cantwell or other politicians to breach the Snake River dams?
Hey, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go Elizabeth.
Okay, so I didn't quite so the I don't know if I caught the very first part of the question because I opened up the queue.
Yeah, I was going to say really quick. So what are the current movements and policies taking place to give the river salmon and orca rights? Okay. And then, so based off of that, how can our audience, one, support it as an individual person, living in the state of Washington, Idaho, that type of thing. And then how can they put pressure on their politician?
Yeah, those are great. Those are great questions. So one effort that is going on right now and that's gained a lot of momentum, as flagged in one of your questions, was recognizing the rights of the southern resident orcas. And, being a keystone species and an indicator of the health of all of these ecosystems, it's recognizing the rights of the southern resident orcas and the ecosystems upon which they depend. So supporting those kind of efforts, getting your local government to pass a proclamation, as we've seen, 8 local governments in Washington passing asking those does take an action towards raising consciousness and helps build momentum towards a state level action, a state law that could recognize the rights of Southern resident workers, or similarly recognize the rights of the Snake River in some form. And there's a lot of options in terms of how such a law could be drafted. But so engaging with groups, I'll put my contact information in there too. And there's a lot of different local efforts to emerging to support this work. So that'd be one thing I'd say on that front. And then in terms of breaching the Lower Snake River dams, one of the key players is the Army Corps of Engineers, which owns and operates the dams. So putting pressure on the Army Corps about the urgency to say they have the authority to breach these dams. And so asking the Army Corps, expressing your concern, and telling them we need to get the dams breached. There's an action page on that DamSense.org, links to that. In terms of different contact information. There's a Biden Breach Now effort that's linked to there, so you can get all the contact information of who you need to contact and send those emails. But definitely, Senator Cantwell, Senator Murray, persuading them that they need to put support on this and lean on the Army Corps of Engineers to take this action, and the urgency and expressing that urgency are key things. So I don't know if I can put that in the chat. I can put kind of those resources. And also put my email.
Okay, and I can always include that in, we usually send out like a follow-up email that has the link to this since it's being recorded. So I can also include that in the email. Julian, do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
Well, the main thing, like I said, we got a little go and get together this Saturday. Free the Snake Flotilla has been going on about 6 years, and we usually have a good bunch of tribal canoe families. But the main thing is to get involved. And my thing is, Zoom is cool. A lot of times people want to have Zoom meetings all day and, talk about what they're going to do. But I think it's good to have rallies and outdoor events. And there's a lot of them over in Seattle. I know they've done some with the orcas and the salmon, but I think it's to get involved and to make a commitment. As this thing here is, I haven't been doing it as long as a lot of people, but when I realized that this is for the future, the treaty rights of the youth that are coming up, the Nimipu that are coming up, not me. I may be gone in 20 years, but I want to do what I can today. And, it's weird because I'm a resident of Washington. Cantwell's really been almost mum on the whole issue. Murray's a little bit better, I think, but maybe they're doing stuff behind the scenes. But it seems like we need to make our voices loud, write letters to the editor. Those do work, and things like that you can get what we want out there. And it's really important to work with groups. There's a million of them. Save Our Wild Salmon. Check out their websites because they're working on these issues. And like this one here, Salmon Orca Project, it has a lot of good speakers, because we need to make sure we have. Because one thing I found over time is, like, even with our tribal council, I can go in there by myself and or write a letter to Senator Cantwell, never respond to me, doesn't even know I exist really. But when we get out there and rally and do public showings or outings, activities, that really shows, get a lot of PR with the newspapers, then that really shows people, hey, we need to start listening. And the constituents are really what's important to these people. They figure you get 100,000 people say, yeah, we support dam breaching, then maybe we should listen to them. Not listen to SEL, Ed Schweitzer, who lives up here in Pullman and has a big network. Like whatever he does, or like whatever the lobbyists that are saying no, don't breach them. And get our word out in the papers. Writing letters to the paper is really good. It really works because I read them. I like to read them, and I see people supporting dam breaching. So that's just one of the issues right now that will help with the orcas. So that's our focus right now, and we're looking at any avenue we can to get this to where the salmon and the orcas are able to live as they should.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, I saw a lot of great questions in the Q&A. I didn't have time to type a response, but if there's a way, I'm happy to respond to those somehow post webinar. And then just wanted to address one of the last questions Hannah I had asked was that there's going to be, there's been, for multiple years, we've been working on efforts to introduce a bill recognizing the rights of the Southern resident orcas. And I think, to that question, educating the public, that what's needed to kind of continue that momentum in that direction, it's great to, see those efforts are continuing, is to bring in a broader coalition of folks, right? And make everyone feel really comfortable with the proposed language. And of course, definitely include include the tribes, include the Coast Salish tribes, include those who have a longstanding relationship with the orcas as their relatives. And then include also, we'd like to see more of the, quote, more mainstream environmental groups like the Sierra Club and others who are really embracing these new paradigms and have large membership bases. Which is a great opportunity to educate the public. So thank you.
Thank you. And I actually did see one question that I wanted to address just really quickly. I mean, we could go on and on and on, on the subject, but I thought it was a good question because it talked about, so can a business case be made for rights of nature to make it more palatable for the people who are not pro-environment?
Julian, do you want to take that one, or I can do a brief?
Either, yeah, just brief. Yes.
Yeah, so briefly, yes, I mean, there's a lot, and that's actually part of a lot of the conversation that's been around southern resident orcas, and we have a toolkit that describes sort of the economic value of the southern resident orcas, right, as an iconic species in the tourism industry. So we always try to be careful of like still recognizing that their intrinsic value and not like they're completely, commodified, but to the point of appealing to a broader group of folks. Definitely, there's, a lot of studies, like there's this kind of small group called Earth Economics that does a lot of those kind of studies and looks at the value of nature and really tries to quantify that in a way that people can understand.
Julian, do you have anything to add? Oh, I think you're.
Can you say it again, the question?
The question was, can a business case be made for rights of nature to make it more palatable for the people who are not pro-environment?
In a business?
Yeah, a business case be made for the rights of nature to make it more palatable for the people who are not pro-environment.
Yeah, like Elizabeth was saying, the value is, it's just like up here, I guess the only thing I could equate it with is a wilderness area. We have Rollers and Wilderness area up here. The value is being able to go out there and enjoy yourself, hike out there. The problem with the timber industry is they want to go cut all the wood and they don't see that as a value. It's like, it's redetermining your values. What's important? Like, is it important to have Rollers and Wilderness area? Yes, of course it is, because we'll have the forest for a long time because it's legal. It's a legal issue. But then if you want to go in there and cut them all, then that's not going to last very long. And so it's a one-time deal. So I think it's important for people to look at the intrinsic value of nature. That's really what it comes down to. And albeit you may use like the tribes, we ate deer and elk and salmon, fish for salmon, but not using it in a manner that is exploiting it to where we want to make money off it. Oh, people back east want to eat Chinook salmon from out here in the west, and it's really a delicacy. Not that type of thing, but making sure that we deal with the way it should be before the big migration out this way to where we're respecting it and living in harmony with it. Like I tell people before the migration, the wolves were doing fine, but after, now Idaho made them extinct and we had to reintroduce them in the state of Idaho. So things like that, where we look at the intrinsic value, aesthetic beauty of nature, rather than just, how much is it worth? How much money can we make? And how can we use it to our ends? And that takes a whole change of thought, with what we're doing with the economy. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up this speaker series for the month of July. I just want to take this time to thank Elizabeth and Julian for their time today. You guys have such valuable knowledge, and I hope you enjoyed being on this panel as well. Our next speaker series will be August 21st, and we're going to shift focus towards energy replacement and what needs to happen to replace the dams. And so with that, again, I say thank you. And if you want more information, please follow the Salmon Orca Project. We're on Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube page. You can always email. Yeah, so thank you again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Chetta. Thanks a lot, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Let me see you again.
Yeah, see you soon.